We have never lived in an age where advice and knowledge are so abundant. It comes from a good place. There's always this desire for us to share what we've learned, share what we know, and so forth. But you don't know how that knowledge may work or fit into your own life, whether it's to your benefit or detriment, unless you actually test it with reality. We are all individual, unique people with completely different circumstances, different upbringings, genes, culture. So every one of us has an inner compass that is solely unique to us. Anything where you feel like you are doing it from your own curiosities, your own interests, and you're doing it with intention, that is a form of creativity. There's never been this time where just mental illness is so pervasive and you have suicide rates growing in the most developed nations in the world. I mean, this is almost to the point where we just shake our head at this, like, yeah, that's just the way the world is now. But that's crazy that it's that way, right? That there is no direct correlation between physical well-being and mental well-being, that sometimes it's often the inverse. And I think a huge part of that is
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Linking Your Thinking. We can see what someone writes, but I want to know how they think. How does the sausage get made? I want to know all those details. And with me today, I'm so excited, is Lawrence Yeo. And Lawrence is the author of a new book, The Inner Compass, Cultivating the Courage to Trust Yourself. I am really over the moon about this book. I'm not just saying that. So I'm excited to dig in. But first, Lawrence, how are you doing?
I am doing good. I feel like we have been in one another's orbit for a long time, so it feels nice to kind of gently collide in this conversation for us together. So I'm just excited to be here.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. And I was just expressing this that you're somebody that I've seen at a distance through different social platforms and different writing, and I just think like, wow, this is sort of like a kindred spirit attacking similar issues from in every sentence I read, every thought, every illustration. I'm just like, wow, like you get it in a very similar way, and I'm so inspired when I read your work. And so for us to now finally be talking, it's very exciting because there's a lot of material to get through.
Thank you. Let's dive in. Let's dive in.
Yeah, well, first, reading the introduction, and you have this book, and it's a tight read. It's just over, I'd say, 100 pages. And you start off with something that I think my audience would be really curious about. You're trying to talk about the difference between knowing a thing and understanding it. And like my domain, some people would call like personal knowledge management. And so knowledge and knowing, but that's not understanding, or is it? Like, how do you think about those two terms to kick us off?
I think the simplest way to describe it is that knowledge is taught through information, but understanding is taught through experience. So, knowledge forms the contextual basis for what is possible and what is there in the map, so to speak, right? But basically, in order to actually have that knowledge convert into any form of wisdom or any form of like kind of understanding who you are and these closer things where it feels much more visceral, then it has to convert into some form of lived experience. So you have to actually walk what you believe is the map and, of course, understand the territory and see how it may fit. Because I feel like we have never lived in an age where advice and knowledge are so abundant, I mean, especially advice, right? And it comes from a good place. I think it always comes from a good place. There's always this desire for us to share what we've learned, share what we know, and so forth. But you don't know how that knowledge may work or fit into your own life, whether it's to your benefit or detriment, unless you actually test it with reality. And it's really this constant testing with reality, stress testing, experimenting, and so forth, where it actually becomes your own form of wisdom, your own form of wisdom. And I like to argue that that's essentially what we're doing here, right? Whether it's knowledge management or anything that is in that domain, what you ultimately want is that knowledge to convert into a form of wisdom. And the only way to do that is to contextualize it in the form of lived experience, which is what I call understanding.
Yeah, and I love that. And because that's the thing, there's knowledge, there's information all around us all the time, and it feels really good when we're collecting this stuff and consuming it. Sometimes engorging on it, and it's like, okay, yeah, I'm improving or I'm knowing more, so therefore I understand the world more. But that's not completely true because Like the knowledge, to your point, is not the understanding. There's no shortcuts. It's we can't speed read our way to understanding,
Hmm.
lived experience. There that is something that's earned. And so, how does one earn it though? Like one person can be up for 12, 18 hours and they might just consume a lot of knowledge, but what is a way to allow more understanding to happen while you're awake and moving out throughout your day?
Yeah, I think I view this as almost a two-step phenomenon of sorts, where let's say you have accumulated knowledge in however way is the best manner for you to do that. The next avenue is kind of the domain of creation, where you take what you know and then you actually try to distill it and put it and condense it into the form of some idea that you then express, right? Because what you're doing is you're taking in that knowledge that you have consumed and you're trying to find the way that it fits in the context of your own perspective, right?
Mm,
And that's 1 degree closer to your being. How have you contextualized that knowledge? And that really happens through the avenue of creativity. Now, creativity can be as small of a scale as you're doing it for yourself, you're journaling, and you are the only consumer of what you create, right? That's what journaling also ultimately is. Or you
yeah.
could scale that up to, hey, I want to share that with an audience, some of whom I have never met before in my life. But through that exertion, through actually putting it out there, you're really trying to contextualize that knowledge and make it resonate in a way, right? So it almost tests your capabilities to see if you can actually do that. And the
Mm,
reason why I don't consider this the end point is that this could still live in the intellectual domain, right? You're still creating and you're writing or you're recording videos and so forth. And you could kind of do that yourself and be in your own bubble. The second part is to actually live it out in the form of values. Like, what does it
mm,
mean to incorporate what you've created into your own value system and be out in the world in terms of how you show up for the people that are actually physically around you and the people that matter to you the most. And
mhm,
really through the avenue of relationship, right? You can do that in the domain of creativity, but a lot of times you're doing it without any particular person in mind.
mhm.
So it's easy to get away with things. But once you're out in the world and once you're interacting with people and you have to test everything that you've put out and test whether you could actually live this out in the context of your own life, then that embodiment of your
Mm.
creativity as a value system becomes a way for you to truly convert everything you picked up in the beginning to understanding.
Yeah, so that embodiment, that idea of like relationships, like we can't just live in our IV tower in the clouds and just intellectualize everything. There's like this connection where we are relating with others. And I think that's a really good opportunity for us to like look back of how you kind of came into your understandings, how your upbringing. I'm kind of curious, like you write in the book that you were depressed and depression is something that feels so unique, and yet everyone might go through similar aspects of it. And then, how did you grapple with your own depression when it was happening? What kind of helped you work your way out to somewhere else?
Yeah, I feel like depression and sadness are all kind of commingled sometimes, but I feel like sadness is when you're feeling down when things are not going well. There's a reason for your sadness. Depression is when you're feeling down even when things are going okay.
Mm,
It's circumstance independent. So even if things are relatively all right physically, you're okay. You're safe. You have a roof over your head. You know where you're gonna get a meal from the next day, what have you. But internally, something just doesn't feel right. Something feels like there just feels like a fog all around you, and you may try to trace it back to some form of reason, but a lot of times trying to understand that reason feels evasive and you could be even more depressed. And you kind of keep living in your head in that sense. So I think the first thing is to kind of differentiate those two because sometimes there's a reason that you may be upset or sad, and that's not quite depression. I think depression is something where you really don't quite understand what exactly is going on. And of course, there are biological arguments for depression, and there are also psychological elements to it. But I think what I'm
Mm,
focusing on more here is in my own experience, there was this kind of restlessness that even though I had the job that I was supposed to have, even though I had a place I was living, I knew that my family loved me. Um, I was just in a state of misery. I just felt anxious. I felt down. I felt like there was nothing that I could do to kind of get out of this in a sense. I felt like I did everything I was supposed to do, but what? And
mm,
I think that feeling was quite pervasive. And it's the feeling that you don't have any option ahead of you. Like everything feels so fogged up where you could start feeling a little bit hopeless. And I felt that in my early 20s. And it was kind of shortly after graduation where, yeah, it was like I thought this path was it, and it's not. And I think when I think back on it now, there was this element of me feeling like I knew I was supposed to be doing something else based upon what my own compass was directing me towards. And I've always seen myself in some way or form, a shape or form, like a quote unquote creative person, someone that liked to just share my ideas with others. And the way I would do it in the past is I'm just, around a campfire with some bros and say something deep and like, oh, that's deep, man. But I felt like there was something more I could be doing with this, and I just didn't know what. Um, but the way that I started to see a brighter path was that I started experimenting with various art forms just to see what it's like to break the rhythm and the monotony of the fog that was all around me. So
mm,
I started venturing into music. And this was purely off of the fact that, hey, I knew in the past I like music, I like sharing ideas, and maybe music, I'm going to go with that and see what happens.
okay.
And I started tinkering around, making beats in my spare time. And there was no purpose behind it other than I just need to do something different. And I need to find an avenue to get whatever I may be feeling out, to just release that in some shape or form. And incredibly, while I was doing it, I knew that it wasn't very good, but the knowledge that I wasn't very good kind of drove me further. Like, there is this gap between what I feel like I'm capable of and where I'm at now. And this belief in my capability started to kind of like spread some of those clouds away. Whereas
Yeah.
before, I felt like there was nothing I was really going for. There was nothing more I wanted to be doing in a certain sense.
And just to hop in on there, is like mastery is a term that is big for you. And when I read that again, I was like, yes, we're really in sync with a few of these terms, as opposed to accomplishment. And I think when you're playing this instrument that you're not good at, you weren't trying to think, I'm going to go to Juilliard or play in the biggest stage, the instrument. I don't think, anyways, that was your goal. So like, what was it then? Like, why did you pick this up? I mean, and where were you hoping to go with it, if anywhere?
Yeah, you touch on that word mastery. And I really think that mastery is the quest to improve yourself as an end in itself. Comparisons are not made with other people, but only with prior versions of yourself.
That's
That's what
hard.
you're trying to do. So there's no external barometer. There's nothing that you're trying to achieve based upon what someone else has done. And I was certainly in that phase when I was starting out with music. And I'm sure when you were starting out on your creator journey, we all start there where there's something intrinsically motivating about what we're doing. And then we might get into this later. There's the layers of conditioning and other stuff that go on top of that that could make you burn out or feel all these other things. But
Hmm.
when you think about the start of any given journey, whether it's creative, whether it's entrepreneurial, what have you, there is always this element of, I can do better at this. And there's something about my tastes that signify I have more to go. Right.
Mm,
And
yeah.
I really think if there's something you feel about that, like when you see an art form or a craft or an endeavor that has that kind of texture, it's so worthwhile to pursue because it starts from your own inner core. And there's something beautiful about knowing that it's there. Because sometimes when you go astray, at least you have the knowledge that that's where I
Mm,
started and I can always return there. And I think the desire to want something to master on its own accord for its own sake is so
Yeah.
powerful, especially when you're not feeling very great about life or when you're feeling lost, because it gives you kind of this objective that is purely internal. And there's this internal barometer that's pushing you, not someone else's words pulling you towards it and taking you away. So
Yeah.
having that was so powerful for me when I was getting started in that sense.
Yeah, so I want to touch on something here and kind of connect it to the land of linking or thinking, but then go back over to the path and the compass and some of these metaphors that you've put together. So, like in linking or thinking land, um, something that it meant a lot to me, especially when everyone was locked in home during the pandemic, and they were trying to like master knowledge management and all this, and so you could do more and finish your projects. And I was like, okay, that's great, and it's true, but there's this whole other world that's not just based on hardcore productivity for knowledge. And I was like, we can actually just think for the joy and the sake of thinking. Like there, it's a means unto itself, just like you're saying, and that there's a certain joy with that. And something with your book kind of felt like so in line with this sort of form of not outward striving, but something that's happening more internally. And I think it relates to what the book is titled, "The Inner Compass," and especially in the latter part of the book, you talk about this path, and when you're getting pushed off of the path, and then the inner compass is bringing you back. And I think that's really helpful. And I know you could probably talk about it from a bunch of different angles, but how would you like to talk, like express the inner compass and like this? I mean, what is it exactly, and how is it guiding us, or
Mm.
how can it guide us?
So the inner compass is a metaphor that people may have heard of before when it comes to describing you following what you believe your own path to be. But I felt like there was a slightly different way that I could frame it that that addresses some of the qualms that people have about when it comes to following your intuition and so forth. Because
Mm,
a lot of it could kind of be in this mystical, spiritual woo element, which I completely understand. But whenever I hear about intuition and so forth, I have this objection, which is, well, how do you know that it's properly calibrated? If you follow it and you think it's the right place, and next thing you know, there's a cliff, maybe it might not have been that great to follow in the first place. So I I wanted to bake that objection into the way that I presented the metaphor. So the metaphor here is as follows: you have an inner compass, and we basically this is the tool that we use to essentially navigate the world. I mean, we are all individual unique people with completely different circumstances, different upbringings, genes, culture. So every one of us has an inner compass that is solely unique to us, and that helps us find our way through this world that tries to standardize everything and that basically has wants to assign a certain function upon all of us to be valuable in a certain way. So it's a way of squaring those two domains. Now, your true north here, the way I like to describe true north is what you have conviction in, as
mm,
in what makes you feel like you are driven on your own accord to move toward that direction, irrespective of what your culture, of what your norms, of what your expectations want you to do. So if that was at zero, what would you do? Right?
mhm.
Some common forms of this question is like, if you had all the money in the world, right? If like, what would you
Yeah,
do? That's one way to think about conviction. The bot now, anywhere your true north is not pointed, anywhere around it is what I refer to as the realm of conditioning. So you have conviction and conditioning.
mhm.
And conditioning are essentially the any narrative, any story that has been essentially layered upon you to try to show you what it means to be safe, what it means to have certainty, what it means to have status, all these things that essentially divide us into hierarchical structures, right? That
Yeah.
is the domain of conditioning.
Let's dig into that. So we're talking conviction and conditioning, and I definitely want to keep going with inner compass. But there is something so well articulated by you around conditioning, social conditioning, and kind of, especially when you want to express yourself, and then you go on to the internet and see everyone else expressing themselves, and all the engineering around that to knock us off, like knock us off course. Um, Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. It's funny because I was just watching one of your YouTube videos from back in the it was maybe a year ago about just your struggles with burnout, and you were
Oh,
talking about that. And that resonated too. I feel like a lot of folks in what we're kind of doing here struggle with that element. And much of it is because of this element of, well, I should be doing it a certain way. I should be
mm,
writing so I could attain a certain outcome. I should be making videos so I could get people to my program. There's
mm,
these narratives of, okay, what you create has to become something else. You can't do it on its own accord because there's no purpose. Everything needs to have a concrete purpose, yo. And and that that really is a conditioned narrative. It is. And really, what we're trying to do with the inner compass is you're trying to balance the the realities of some of these conditioned narratives in terms of, okay, if I want to navigate the world, if I want to function in the world, there's some of it that is useful, but the problem is we rarely contextualize it in our own life. So that goes back to the knowledge and understanding element, right?
mm,
It's like,
mhm,
if we learn that this is a certain way to do something to give us success or whatever, instead of taking that as gospel, what would it mean to question that and to wonder, oh, wait, how about I view that as a source of inspiration and not as a source of, I have to do this, right? Because when
mhm,
you're inspired by something, you find ways to incorporate that into your own life as opposed to when you just absorb it. So it's always this. What I want to do is add a little layer of discernment when it comes to what you're looking out in the world. Because when you go on social media, what you're essentially doing is you're opening up your mind to everyone else's narratives and lived experience.
mm,
And what's funny is that no one actually tells you, haha, you're doing what you're doing wrong. This is the right way. It's more of your own interpretation. You look at that method and you're like, wait, I got to do that. I have to do that. It's your own voice telling you to do that. And that's how deep the conditioning goes, is that it has convinced you that you believe that narrative.
mm.
So,
So that's yeah. Oh yeah, when you're talking about the stories, and it's like, so the stories that we're telling ourselves, and they go deep that way. Like, I have to do what this person's doing, and also because I'm not. And the way you wrote that, it was like the social media feeds are engineered to, make us feel, I forget, like uncertain or unsteady and alone, and that's the best of the best that rise to the top. And so then we're conditioned to compare ourselves to that, and inevitably you can't stack up to the endless onslaught of everyone's best rising to the surface, and you just woke up and you're staring at a screen. It's not a good feeling.
no matter what you have done in your own life. And I think that is the kind of trap of achievement in a certain sense, is that your circles of influence continue to change as whatever level of achievement or so forth you have changed. And this is why when anyone starts out doing what they're doing, for example, it's like there's a magical number. If I hit 100K, oh my god, like that would be a dream, right? and,
Uh-huh.
and but what's interesting is that even if you're not quite there yet, let's say you get to maybe 30K or something, we'll just use this as an example. What happens is that the what you were paying attention to at 0 is different when you're at 30, right? The circles of
Hmm.
influence, the people that you're around, it becomes more of like, oh, people are kind of doing this, people that gain traction. So your people they start paying attention to shifts with everything you go to. So by the time you're at 100K, that feels like an inevitability as opposed to a dream. And then you start thinking, well, 150 is inevitable, 200 is inevitable, right? And you get disappointed when you realize it's actually not an inevitability. There's a lot more that goes into it if that's something that you desire.
Yeah. And then even when you do get to whatever that desire is, it's relatively fleeting. And then I loved near the end the antidote to envy. Just everything in that section. I have a few parts open here. Ultimately, envy is the result of not knowing who you are. It arises when you outsource your definitions of success to whatever norms you've adopted, whether consciously or not. That rings, it's like that, when something's true, and that just rings so true. And you talk about something else too with that. I was like, oh yeah, that's good. Brene Brown with vulnerability, like it's like synonymous, right? Vulnerability, Brene Brown, like it's had its moment. But what about envy? Like no one's talking about that, but you are here. I'll add to that pettiness too. I've noticed, like for
Mm,
myself, I've had to like call myself out on that in the past couple of years, and like really like continue to work on it. It's like, where are these feelings coming from?
mm,
And like, shouldn't I be happy for someone else's success? And like, why am I like, what's going on? And it's a continued struggle of mine, but to your point, it's something that's not being talked about a lot. So I was like, I wanted to talk to Lawrence about this a bit. Just like it's real, and that you brought it out is really valuable.
I talk about envy so much because I really think that envy is one of the greatest problems in today's society. Because today's society, we are, generally speaking, if you're not in a war torn, impoverished country with terrible civic infrastructure, we are physically fairly safe.
Mm.
And yeah, we are quite comfortable. But mentally, I don't think it's a stretch to say that there's never been this time where just mental illness is so pervasive, and you have suicide rates growing in the most developed nations in the world. I mean, this is almost to the point where we just shake our head at this, like, yeah, that's just the way the world is now. But that's crazy that it's that way, right? That there is no direct correlation between, you know, physical well-being and mental well-being, that sometimes it's often the inverse. And
Yeah.
and I think a huge part of that is envy. It's envy and the feeling of inadequacy and the constant exposure that we have into other people's lives. But more so the way that we just cannot talk about it, the way that it's a taboo. Um, Even talking about the fact that you have envy or that you may be petty, there is like this taboo around it, that you shouldn't feel that way and no one's gonna have any sympathy for you, right? But this is circulating through. I mean, I would dare to say everyone's minds, anyone that has access to social media and a smartphone. Um, and I really thought about the anatomy of envy too and why it's so destructive. A big reason is why I think envy lives in the people that have the potential to be very close to you. So, for example, let's say
Hmm.
wealth, right? People like Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates, these folks, you're not going to envy these people. If
Mm.
anything, you will try to learn from them. You'll be inspired by them. Envy lives in like that person you went to college with, and then you saw on LinkedIn or something they recently got some crazy promotion, and you're like, oh, what the hell, yo? Like, I,
Yeah.
I was once in a very similar position as you, and you've gone on to do this. Well, I'm kind of here. Or a business partner that you no longer work with that has done something else that you may have dreamed of, or maybe is just one step away from you in your eyes. That's where envy is huge, right?
Yeah.
So, and
Yes.
family members, a huge source of envy, right? So,
Mm.
people that actually are the closest to you and have the potential to actually talk about this with and
Mm.
have a lot of fruitful dialogue around are people you start to detest inside.
Yeah.
And as a result, you start to detest yourself. I mean, that's one of the themes that I talk about, is that relationship is a mirror. The way you view others reflects the way you view yourself. So you view others in that way, it's no surprise that it's going to be, each day is going to be a slog for you.
To that point, I felt it within myself, and the more I work on it, then what's strange is when I had some good things happen, and I was like, this is a big enough news event that I'm going to actually reach out and tell people. It was so interesting. There were very specific friends that I either resisted to tell or just didn't tell at all, because I knew, like, I understood that that would trigger intense, like, feelings within them that were not positive. And what was conversely great was when there were other friends over the years, and when I shared this, and I felt their just complete unconditional happiness for this thing. And I was like, man, I wish I can embody like what you're embodying right now. Like Amr is one of my friends from college. And I was like, I wish I can treat my friendships like you're treating the one that we have right now. Like it was something to
Mhm.
aspire towards.
Dang, that's really powerful. Yeah, that's a great observation. Just how you may want to withhold some information that has happened in your life, great things from certain people. And whereas you just have this innate understanding that with some people, doesn't matter what happens, you want to share everything. And regardless, they'll have your unconditional support. And it is and this is not just Nick's life, right? This is I what's interesting is what you're saying right now rings true because this is everybody's life. There is always this notion of how much do I share because I know in this context I might I might trigger that feeling because of some history or the way we are. And then others essentially, like your friend you described, that's a relationship where there really is no game to be played. There's
Mm,
no game at all. And chances are a lot of these friends, there's a reason why they tend to stem from a childhood is
mm.
because in that arena, there's no game to be played other than we just hang out together and kick around a hacky sack or whatever for recess, and that's it. So you're kind of divorced from the areas of status and wealth and things of that nature. I mean, in high school there's cliques and ranking of your intellect and so forth, but it's not as ingrained, right?
Mhm.
So when you start a relationship with somebody based upon this element of no conditions, there's no games whatsoever, those are the ones that end up flourishing well into adulthood because and there when you share something, there's no game, that you have their unconditional love.
Yeah.
And the challenge I think with friendships as you get older, why a lot of people have a hard time making friends later is that there's a lot of other labels on you now. There's a lot of labels on you now. I mean, it's no secret why people ask, "What do you do?" They want to understand what label to use for you first. And if that label happens to pique their interest in a way where they're like, "Oh, this person's label indicates this thing," then I want to get to know them better and stuff. And those things don't quite have that same conditionless element as your childhood friend does.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really true. And that's it. Yeah, what do you do? And they're like, is this someone that I should pay attention to? You have to like filter out, is this someone worth my time?
Yeah.
It's really kind of an interesting phenomenon that we go through. So part of that then is like how then when this conditioning is happening, how are and we get like blown by the winds of it all. Like how do we get back on track? Like how do we, work with the inner compass? So you're talking about conviction and then the conditioning. And so like kind of going back then to yeah, how do we apply the inner compass or find it again and feel more aligned with who we are and who we can be.
Mm. So this is where I want to first introduce the second part of the metaphor is that you have this inner compass and the question of when you feel aligned, how do you know you're aligned in the right direction? And the way I view it is that there's actually a magnet on top of the compass here. You could consider it what people may call metacognition or meta intuition of sorts, where
Mm,
essentially it's a magnet that's pulling on your pointer, and if it's tiny, then when the winds of conditioning blow, it's the magnetism isn't strong enough, so you end up following your conditioning. But if
mm.
it's bigger, it's more aligned, and even if the winds of conditioning are strong, you're still able to stay aligned and move forward. This magnet is what I refer to as self-understanding. The
Okay.
the practice and exercise of knowing yourself, and the more you delve into that space, then the more you could be sure that where your intuition is pointing you towards is the right direction.
So it's the size of the magnet. We want to make that magnet bigger as a metaphor for self-understanding.
Correct, correct. And I think one of the greatest pursuits of life is to make that magnet bigger and stronger. So that way you can trust that your intuition is guiding you to the right place. But when I talk about intuition, I always say that it needs to be stress tested by reality to earn its reliability. You have to
Hmm.
keep putting into contact with the outside world to trust that learn the lessons required for it to be right. And
Hmm.
a big part of that feedback loop is how your magnet grows. And the way in which you make it grow, I basically break it down into three pretty simple principles, which is to reflect, relate, and create. Reflect, relate, create. I think that these three words are very simple, but they house an abundance of detail. And each one of them tackle different parts of yourself and your relationship to the world.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love it. I have an affinity for these things that come in threes. Reflect is great. I have a similar thing that comes in threes. Guess what the middle one is? Relate. In a
Ah,
different sort of sense, more in that idea sense. I think yours is also is really grounded in um, relationships.
what's yours?
Relate. So it's the three steps of sense making. Add new experiences or information. Relate. So connect the dots, and then communicate, like
Mm,
express your thoughts, essentially.
mm,
Um, and so but yeah, I see a very similar sort of pattern, but there are differences and there are nuances too. And again, one of the major goals with Inner Compass is self understanding. From what I understand from here, you're trying to say what you said at one point was it's kind of a tragedy that we understand so much of ourselves at the very end of our path, and then we pass away, and who knows what's next. But your hope with the book is that we can understand ourselves a bit sooner, and that we can have a way to further get there, and that's where reflect, relate, and create can help with. Is that right?
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, age and wisdom tend to be directly correlated because experience yields lessons, right? And lessons yield the experience you need. So I want to really break that. Like, I feel like in the end, education, the whole function of education is to break the correlation between age and wisdom. It's
Mm.
how do you shortcut that whole process so that you don't have to be 80 and 90 and then you're like, oh, dang, like now I understand what really it matters and not just understand, but I know how to live that out, right? Like, how do we do that earlier? So,
Mm.
I feel like this three-step process with reflect, relate, create really helps with that. So the first element of reflect really is to it's a more it's a more solitary phenomenon where it's kind of more tied into like your stereotypical archetype of what it means to know yourself, right? You know, you're kind of just in your own world and you're trying to figure out yourself. So the danger of that though is that you don't want to be stuck in your own mind when it comes
Yeah.
to reflecting, right? You know, so I don't really advocate just meditating all the time and being alone and so forth. Like there has to be something kinetic for you to understand what's really at the root of yourself. Like you're trying to peel away all the conditioning that may be layered upon you and through the avenue of reflection try to get there. And perhaps unsurprisingly, and I think you'll resonate with this too, I really point to the exercise of writing as a way to do that. And I had to think whether I was just biased towards this because I'm a writer, but time and time again, this is actually quite timeless wisdom. It's actually been passed down through the ages of how writing serves as an avenue to understanding yourself and to knowing yourself better. I mean,
Mhm.
journaling is the ultimate function, is the if there is one thing that journaling helps you do most is to understand yourself because you're doing it for an audience of one, maybe not even one, because it might be zero, because you might not even read it at the end. And that
Yeah.
gibberish is kind of the point. It's the point of the practice.
Yeah. It just becomes a gibberish, but it's like a conversation. It's in the moment, and it's pulling you out from the stream of all the conditioning, all the noise, and then you just have at least a moment where you're pulled out from it. And I like the distinctions you're making between um, journaling and writing as opposed to meditating. Both are fine, but they're totally not the same thing.
Yes.
Because you had some good lines on like meditating. It's it's not, you're not thinking your way through it.
Yeah, meditation is the absence of thought to achieve stillness, whereas reflection is the usage of thought to achieve clarity. So
Mm,
they're very different. Um, Meditation is more the art of doing nothing, whereas reflection is a active active activity that you engage in to understand your mind better. And it's very so what I'm advocating for is the usage of thought, not the elimination of it.
mm-hmm.
The problem though is that people have a hard time doing that without getting trapped in their minds, right? They're
Mm,
like, "Well, I'm the intellect is producing my problem, so why am I relying upon it to solve my problems?" And
yeah.
and that's why I advocate writing, because when you write, and I have to make it clear again, it's just for yourself. Like, you're taking any potential dam of doubt that you may have of like, "Oh, people may see this," you're lowering that, and when you do that, you have a torrent of thoughts that could just come out and come out and come out. So you're gonna lose a lot of order, but you're gonna gain a ton of catharsis. There will be your thoughts are gonna shine with so much vulnerability and honesty. And it's the act of doing that where you feel like you're in this oasis of time. It might just be 10 minutes, but you're plugged in to something else that is completely void of the world around you. And
Mm,
we rarely take the time to do that, right? Maybe we take some time to meditate, but once again, we rarely actually use our thoughts in a way that is completely divorced from the outside world. But
mm.
to take a small moment to do that gives you a touch point, which is why I don't know how many people would describe the benefits of journaling, right? And it's because it works in that context. It
Yeah.
works what it does for you. The clarity you get into who you are without the conditioning becomes so apparent when you do it.
So your book, it sticks with mainly these timeless ideas, so you don't go too heavy into tactics and everything. But one that you did bring up was asking questions, such as why, going deep on why. Kind of, I think that ties back to very early on, is like what is the story? Like what are the stories I'm telling myself? You had a variation of what I said that was better, but like, is how would you say for someone who's wondering, okay, I'm staring at the blank page that I'm about to type, or the written page I'm about to write, like how do I just get started? Like what am I supposed to say? Like where do I go first?
So let's start with kind of the general theory here. So I have to make a distinction between a diary and a journal, because a
Mm,
lot of people don't see the benefit of journaling because they treat it as a diary. And a diary is more so the what's of life, what I
mm.
did, right? What I felt, what I saw. So
So
these
it's more
are
of like a
cool.
it's more of like a log.
Yeah, it's more of a log of your life, right? And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, right? But what I want to encourage more of is a journal, which, so through my terminology, is where you ask the whys of what you've experienced, right? So why did you feel a certain way? Why did you react that way?
Mm,
So I have an example of, for example, let's say you go to a work party and you felt kind of anxious at this party, which a lot of people do when they go to these things. A diary would be more of like, today I went to a work party and I felt anxious. I don't like how I feel this way. This is time and time again. I feel this whenever I see these people, and something along those lines. A journal would be more about, okay, you could start with the what, but then start adding words like because or why. So it would be like, today I went to a work party and felt anxious all the time because the people that I see here don't seem to share the same value system as me. Mine is about following my curiosity, but all they talk about is make how to make a ton of money. And then you could be like, well, so why do I keep putting myself in this position? Um, I I've been working here for 5, 6 years. I have decent amount of money saved up. Why do I keep tolerating these people? So
mm,
you see how one is just a log of what you did and so forth, and that's where people scratch their heads and be like, well, what's the utility in that? The
mm,
other is more so, yes, you have a log, but then you start asking yourself about your own behaviors, about your own patterns of thought. And a lot of time when you start cataloging all that out, you'll see that at the end of it, you're doing what you think you should be doing. That's why you're in this position.
Yeah. I think that's so important and really excites me to kind of reflect on my own journaling. I think there's a lot of why in there, but I'm like, how can I even have more why? Like how can I even ask more questions? And you probably don't know this, but because is like the word that the one word habit I try to instill in linking your thinking, because it's the one word that moves us with certainty from consuming to creating.
Mm,
Because anything that's said after a because it's you, like it has to be you. And but you and so like why and because they're two sides of the same coin. And I love that. It's not to be a know-it-all, but just to like throw something out there on the page, right? No one else is reading it. It's just, and then from that, okay, I like what I said, it's true. Or oh, now that I see it, no, that's not really how I feel. It's more like this, but at least I have something to externalize and bounce off of.
that's just a strong frame that everything after because is kind of you. And there's this element of when you are able to pin down the why, the how starts to come about naturally.
Mm.
When you've identified the why, then you think of, all right, well, now that I know that, the way in which I could go about it becomes more clear. Like why and how are so embedded together, but you have to
Mm.
get to the why first. The why is really important before the tactics and all that stuff come about after.
Yeah. And I just love that. I think that's so simple and practical for someone to pick up who's like new to journaling and kind of curious about how to get into it. And it's just like, okay, if I keep on asking why I felt a certain way, and then we're doing really important work too. Like it's emotion work, it's self work, which then ties all back to the core. One of the core themes is the self understanding that's so crucial. Um, I'm curious. From reflect, we go into relate, and how do you see that a transition happening? Is it an overlap, and what's happening in relate?
So reflect is when you try to get to the unconditioned mind, right? Like who are you without the layers of the conditioning that's been placed on you upon others? Like what is the inherent you? However you may want to define that. And then relate becomes more about now that you understand yourself better, who are the people that you want to share this core with? And also, how do you want to treat people around you now that you had this higher level of realization about yourself? And the reason why I put a lot of emphasis in relate is because I feel that self understanding is a communal affair. And the reason is that life is a single player game, but meaning is derived on multiplayer mode.
Mm.
That is the truth. We live our lives in our own minds, our own heads. We have our own ideas and stuff, but everything you do has a ripple effect. It has an impact on someone else's life, no matter how small or big you think it is. And that impact is how you generate meaning. And that's why, like, you talk to parents or something, there's just this inherent meaning. Like, I have whatever I do has an impact on my child. And people that create whatever idea I put out will have an impact in some sense. So meaning comes as a function of that, but you can't have it with other people, like without other people. Other people are such a crucial part of this whole process. And if you've done the work to remove the layers of conditioning, then what you start to do is to view people without that conditioning as well. And I focus a lot in the book about the element of status and how our pursuit of status is one of the greatest hindrances to the ability to know oneself and the
Mm-hmm.
ability to treat people with compassion and so forth. I think there is a function of status because one thing you mentioned earlier, it's yeah, something you're trying to figure out like who do I want to pay attention to? I have to have some sort of filtering mechanism there in place. But I'd argue that the more of that filtering system you place on people in general, the more you're going to view your own status as your indicator of self-worth. You cannot divorce one from the other. So, yeah, you could have that filtering mechanism. Just realize, though, that you're probably gonna have a greater capacity for envy. That's not gonna
Mhm.
go away because that's how you're choosing who to talk to or others, right? That's the same barometer you're using, so you're gonna use that same barometer for yourself.
Yeah.
So
That's it. That's interesting. I just because I agree with you. And there's the online world, and that's usually what we're referring to now. I spent 3 years in New York City after growing up in Montana, and what was really interesting is that I had to like dial up my filtering mechanism while walking on the streets. Essentially, instead of being completely open, like here I can just go, "Hey, how's it going?" And in fact, but right before our call here, I went to this place. It's kind of like a staple restaurant for a sandwich, and I recognized the guy's voice. Now I'm back in Montana after like a 15 year or 13 years away, something like that. And he's like, "Hey, I know you." He's like, "It's
wow.
been a few years." I'm like, "It's been more than a few years." It's like he's like, "You're Nick." I'm like, "How?" Like that's
Wow.
amazing. Yeah.
Dang.
And so like, you can have that conversation, whereas in a place like New York City, you can't do that because you just passed 5,000 people in the span of like 2 hours on the subway and walking around the streets. And if you did that, you would just be like exhausted, like all that input on you. So then it's like you have to like, I don't know what the answers are here, but like you have to put up some sort of armor or filtering mechanism in those sort of situations, or else you'll be kind of like ran over. But it doesn't serve us well. And there's a flip side to it, perhaps, in that now we're judging. Now we're threat assessing. Okay, is this someone I should ignore, not make eye contact with? Is it someone I should try to at a social event seek out, have a good conversation with, impress them? And yeah, it's I would just say it's not black and white with when that conditioning is like taking over one the way that at least myself I would move through the world. I'm like, okay, where's this coming from? And it might be, oh, suddenly it's less inner compass, and it helped me navigate the streets of New York. But now, in a social event or online or somewhere else, it's still the thing that's guiding me as opposed to a more internal source, perhaps. I don't know. I'm just kind of like spitballing
That
some thoughts here.
that makes total sense. I mean, it really is a paradox where you understand you have the knowledge that yeah, there has to be a better way than this, but when you're actually out in the world, there's the reality of your survival mechanism going online, and there's the reality of, well, hey, I want to keep progressing in my path as a creator and so forth, and the circles that I'm seeking are this as opposed to this. Um, it's a tension for sure that to have to navigate, and I think in your response was kind of the answer, or in what you just said, in the sense that I feel like when you're using survival as the North Star here, then you're not going to override that. Like it's not really conditioning. Survival and conditioning are two different things, right? I think
Mm,
survival is more so, hey, I just want to make sure that I'm okay, that my physical frame is okay, and everything in your body is alerting you of moments where it could go astray. Whereas conditioning, and that's why I make a point in the book to talk about psychological suffering, and that's more so how you choose to view your surroundings in the sense of your own what you may consider to be psychological survival, but it really is just another way of you feeling like I want to keep progressing in this thing. And that's the trick is that survival at some point becomes subjective, especially in our world. Survival becomes more about preservation than it becomes accumulation. Like, how do I just keep what I have? How do
mm,
I continue doing this? And this actually reminds me of a Kendrick Lamar line. He has this, he talks about it's in To Pimp a Butterfly, but he talks about how when he didn't have money, he was kinder to those that didn't have money. Like he was more open to giving homeless people money and so forth. And he's like, now that I'm rich, I find myself disassociating more and more, walking away more, not engaging and stuff. And I thought that that was a very self-aware thing for him to say, like he's like, I don't have the answers figured out, but I recognize this pattern in myself, and there's something interesting going on here as a result. And
Yeah.
I really think what's happening in there is some form of conditioning that makes you feel like you are in this particular space now, in this social circle, whatever. So you have to remove yourself from everybody else. I think that is
Mm.
continuously happening. And when I argue for compassion, what I'm trying to do here is that if you have an opportunity to exercise that compassion, then exercise it. And that's different. If you're in New York City walking around, there's 5,000 people around you, you don't really, the opportunity may reside in a simple thing like opening the door for someone or, like regardless of who's coming through, you operate the turnstile and let them through, whatever it might be.
Mhm. Yeah.
But whenever there's an opportunity, I think it's important to take it regardless of who you may be helping or not. And that's what I mean by compassion. I don't really mean being nice and trying to embrace everyone. I think compassion has a hard edge to it too, which is when the opportunity is there, then you can exercise that element of kindness for somebody.
I haven't heard compassion having a hard edge, but I like that, and I think I feel it too because having a hard edge and sort of that motion that you're making ties back to discernment, and I can't remember the root word exactly, but it is something like to slice or dessayer or something. But there's like that, there's that, yeah, that awareness of when is the right time? Can I act in the right way?
Hmm.
Um,
I mean, we
yeah.
value honesty, right? Like we want people that love us to be honest with us. And when you're saying be honest with me, you're saying that cut through it even if it's going to hurt.
Mm,
And that's why that's not the same thing as being nice, but that is an act of compassion. There's a difference.
mm, yeah, that's good. Let's cover the third one, create,
Yeah, we
right?
love
So
that one.
yeah, that one seems pretty natural, at least in this kind of sphere of like creators and sharing things online. I know it goes way broader and more basic than that too, though.
Mhm.
So okay, we've reflected, we've related relationships. Then how does create fall into this kind of way of self understanding?
Yeah, I view create as the way to bridge the domains of reflection and relationship seamlessly. So if reflection is more of an internal understanding of self and relate is all about how you show up for others and you trying to build your small world that you would like to see really through your own values, then creativity is the vessel that makes that happen. It's what allows those two domains to go fluidly in between one another. And that's because it's a form of sharing. It's a form of sharing what you've learned. It's a form of sharing your value system with others, and if that resonates with other people, then what you end up having is these unconditioned cores that are kind of resonating with one another and this unfiltered perception of who you are. So, the biggest thing about creation is agency. And this is a word that I refer to over and over again, but agency ultimately is about it stemming from your true curiosities and interests, right? And that's how you see what a creative act is. So some people might say, "Oh, a painter is a creative person," but it depends on why he paints. Like if he's painting because let's say his mom is some famous painter and she expects him to carry on the family
Mm,
name, is it a creative act now? I don't know. It might just be a job for him. As opposed to something like this where we're just talking. Like if we were just picked up the phone and we were talking, maybe that wouldn't be a creative act. We wouldn't consider that. But the fact that there's two microphones and we're doing this, we set the intention here to talk about something. That intentionality is what makes this a creative act. And intentionality is nothing more than agency. That's what agency is, right?
mm,
So
mm,
anything where you feel like you are doing it from your own curiosities, your own interests, and you're doing it with intention, that is a form of creativity.
mm,
So I really encourage creativity as a form of self understanding and knowing yourself because when you do that, you start to kind of build your own car to navigate the world and you could choose the passengers you want to be around, which is the greatest part of this whole journey. Um, and that's why creativity is like never a solo affair. Like you have to have everyone involved, you have to have different people involved, and then you have to do it through the form of your own self expression. Um, And of course, I think the pursuit of mastery has to be layered upon there, because once you start pursuing status through this, then a lot of
Mhm.
times it doesn't become an avenue of self expression. It becomes a way to make up for a deficiency in self worth.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So agency. If you say I have to do something, then it's almost like that agency, it might still be in somewhat of control of what you're doing, but with a different intention, probably less curiosity. You're like trying to drag your feet through it. Therefore, creativity itself, it might not be what it could be. Um, and agency is such a powerful word. It really, really is. And then having other people involved versus just yourself and the effects that that has on creativity. Um, all right, so there's something near the end of the book, and I think this is again about envy. And it's like you talk about the dog chasing and catching the car. It's like, well, okay, what does the dog do when it actually catches the car?
Yeah.
And two things: one is keep yourself busy by chasing another car, or learn that this entire chase is pointless. And you had just some amazing drawings, and that's the thing that anyone who's just listening to this has no idea. But Lawrence is an amazing, has such a your whole style and the writing in book is it's like simple, profound. And so I was doing a lot of underlining, and I just got it. And I'm just like, okay, this and the way you say that, and how you're defining the terms, it's really admirable. Because some of these drawings near the end, it's about this hike uphill. It's not a super steep hill, but it's not flat either. It's like, there's some terrain there that you have to traverse. And so when you talked about the chase, I was like, the hike is greater than the chase. And I was like, okay, like everything, and that makes more sense if you read the book, but it's just, yeah, I think this is going to, I hope this is a bit of a sleeper hit. And I think it's one of those that's going to have a long tail as more and more people become aware of it, because it's hitting all the right notes for me. Um, and I know I'm not alone. And I know that what I'm suffering or dealing with on a day in and day out basis is a shared experience, something that you've hit on. I don't know. Just to kind of close this one out, I am so grateful that we are able to share this moment, get together and talk about the inner compass, cultivating the courage to trust yourself, and just going beyond that too. So just everything with your style, it's fun and it's creative. I have one question before we wrap up, and that's this guy that you made, this like little symbol, happy boy perhaps. I don't know if that's how you think about it, but I couldn't help but notice in our email exchanges, in one of your last emails, you did like the happy face sideways, which is an equal sign and a parentheses. And then I looked at this guy completely different, and I thought, is that how you got the look?
That's funny you asked that. You know what's interesting is I drew that thing when I was probably like 8 years old.
Oh, no
So,
way.
yeah, it was this character I thought about when I was a kid, and when I started doing more to that, I just decided to incorporate him just as like a throwback to like, hey, this is from my childhood, and like I want to keep imbuing what I'm doing with that like curiosity. And I had no idea, of course, that he would or it would, like find its way to so many different people's minds and so forth. But I always like to joke that if my 30 something year old self saw like my 8-year old's drawing and be like, it's still going to be the same. That's your drawing style. It's there. That you might kind of laugh at that. But I'm glad that, the character had another use outside of what I was doing in my childhood with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it just evokes, you know, uh, curiosity, absolutely, for sure, and much more. Yeah, just as we're wrapping up, Lawrence, this is amazing. Any final words, or where can we learn more and learn about your work and more of your messaging?
Yeah, so my digital home is moretothat.com. I write a lot of essays, stories, blog posts. I just I say I like to write illustrated stories on the human condition, however
Mhm.
broad that may be defined. And The Inner Compass is my first book. And thanks, Nick, for chatting about it, for reading it, for spending some of your attention with me and on the book. And I hope people enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Lawrence. I hope they do too, because it is phenomenal, and you should be really proud internally. And I'm excited to see what type of impact this has on others.
Thank
So thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of How I Think. We'll be sure to add all the links and resources we mentioned in the video description or show notes, depending on the platform you're watching or listening from. And if you're curious for more, then feel free to check out another episode. I'll see you there.